Today we're going to talk about a story in which a couple celebrates their son's birthday in the middle of the ocean aboard their boat. Suddenly, a violent storm arrives, bringing hungry creatures from the depths, forcing them to fight for their survival. So today we'll see their vibe. One day, oceanographer Tom, his wife Julia, and their two children, Casey and Ben, set off on a yacht trip through the Caribbean Sea. While Tom and Ben are busy fishing and Casey is engrossed in her music, Julia decides to swim. Suddenly, something disturbs her. She looks around, but the sea remains as calm as ever. However, she feels a distinct sense of dread, as if something large and dangerous is circling beneath the water. At the same time, the yacht's instruments begin to behave strangely, but Tom, preoccupied with fishing, pays them no mind. Meanwhile, Julia feels increasingly unwell and eventually begins to drown. She screams, but the family doesn't hear her. The water seems to move and pull her further from the yacht. When the situation becomes critical, Tom finally hears her voice, rushes to the helm, and steers the yacht in her direction. Tom jumps into the water, and with the children's help, they manage to get her back on board and revive her. Angrily, he scolds her, as he always asks that whoever goes swimming notify the others beforehand. Julia apologizes, and the incident is soon forgotten. The family has a reason to celebrate. Today is Ben's 13th birthday. Tom lights the candles on the cake, and everyone congratulates the boy who receives gifts while Casey takes a group photo of the happy family. At that moment, Casey's boyfriend calls her to see how she is, but suddenly an intense storm begins on land. She worries, but her boyfriend assures her he is safe before the connection is cut. Casey tells her parents about the storm. But soon everyone feels strong jolts. They run to the deck and see an enormous whale. Then several whales emerge around the yacht. Tom explains that sometimes they get disoriented during storms, but these creatures begin to push the boat, threatening its safety. Tom dives in to investigate and soon returns injured, explaining that he cut himself on the propeller. Julia stitches the wound on his shoulder while he comments that the yacht's shafts seem bent, probably from a tail strike. It's unlikely they can continue sailing. Casey tries to re-establish communication, but there's no signal, and the radio also fails. Tom calculates the supplies. There's enough water for no more than 4 days. However, they were on a shipping route, so it's likely someone will find them. Suddenly, strange sounds come from outside. The family goes on deck and observes bright objects falling from the sky. They get closer and closer, and Tom, taking a risk, starts the engine to move the yacht away from the next impact, but it ends up damaged. The next object falls so close that they manage to see they are artificial satellites. A strong wind begins to blow, and the instruments go crazy. The terrified family hides inside the yacht, which is shaken by the waves. They put on life jackets and prepare for the worst when a strange hum stuns them and causes nausea. Tom tries to call for help with a flare, but it's all in vain. They barely survive the night. In the morning, they are relieved to discover they are still alive. Although there's a huge hole in the side of the yacht, they don't understand why it's still floating. They go on deck and are frozen in amazement. The water has disappeared. Their boat is stranded on a rocky outcrop in the middle of a stony desert where the ocean once was. Sometime later, Tom tries to reassure his family, saying that not everyone could have died. Taking measurements, he notices the compass is off. North isn't where it should be. This means the Earth's poles have shifted. Something similar happened millions of years ago. The sea has receded, leaving dry land, and humanity has most likely perished. Casey can't bear this revelation and runs to the cabin, asking to be left alone. Julia, meanwhile, inventories the remaining supplies. Ben launches colorful balloons into the sky, hoping a survivor will see them. While Tom turns on the radio to send distress signals, he unexpectedly receives a response. It's NATO, the captain of a small submersible. He explains that they were in the depths when the catastrophe occurred. That's why they survived. All communication systems have failed, and waiting for help is useless. According to his calculations, the sea will return in a week, but with devastating force. He advises them to seek high ground and remain there. Julia orders the children to pack their things. Tom asks Panado if he can rescue his children, but the man explains that the submersible is very small. His partner died, and he can only take one person. After much insistence, Tom manages to convince him to take both children and provides him with the coordinates. He charts a course on the map and promises to reach the meeting point in a couple of days. The next morning, the family is ready to leave. Tom goes on deck and sees a man with a dog approaching. He greets him, but soon notices he's injured. He offers him water, but the stranger suddenly punches him in the face. Julia, seeing this, runs to her husband, just as the man plunges an improvised spear into Tom's chest. The dog attacks Julia, who recoils in horror, realizing she can't save him. She runs to the yacht, pursued by the attacker, who wounds her in the arm. Still, she manages to get on deck. The children, hearing the screams, run to her. Together they block the cabin doors. Julia hides while Casey and Ben take refuge under the sofa. Casey takes the flare gun with instructions to fire it only as a last resort. The killer tries to break down the doors and finally succeeds. Julia, hidden in the back bathroom, tries to tend to her wound. The intruder enters the kitchen and takes some food. It's clear he's hungry. Holding a can, he begins to search the yacht. Julia arms herself with a knife and hides under the gunwale, but the dog detects her and attacks her. She is forced to kill it. The man hears the noises, comes out, and finds the animal's body. As Julia climbs back onto the yacht through the opposite window, she falls directly into the killer's hands, who punches her, throws her onto a sofa, and grabs her by the neck, trying to strangle her. Casey, witnessing everything, understands it's her last chance. She fires the flare, hitting the attacker and setting fire to the inside of the boat. Julia orders the children to flee while she slips into the kitchen. The still-alive killer tries to attack again, but Julia kicks him, grabs the bags, and jumps overboard. There she finds Tom's lifeless body. Casey runs to her father and cries inconsolably. Julia kisses her husband one last time, but seeing the killer jump from the burning yacht, she takes her children and moves away. Behind them, the boat explodes. The family runs through the stony desert and finally takes refuge in a canyon where a small stream flows. However, the water is salty and undrinkable. Casey shares the little remaining water with her brother, but he refuses to drink, feeling guilty, believing the killer found them because of the balloons he launched. Casey also thinks so, but Julia stops them and defends her son, explaining that he only wanted to help without imagining the consequences. Julia tells the children to recover because a long journey awaits them. Then she sees the killer again, relentlessly following their trail. The family rushes forward. Along the way, Ben finds a stranded hammerhead shark and tries to help it. But Julia sees the killer and orders the children to run. Soon they stumble upon a field of barrels of toxic waste that were once submerged under the sea. But Julia urges them to keep moving despite the risk of contamination, knowing that the killer is still pursuing them. As the family walks across the old ocean floor, zigzagging between piles of plastic and garbage discarded by humans, Julia notices that Ben is severely dehydrated. She gives him the last drops of water. Casey suffers a nervous breakdown, convinced she has no chance of survival. But Julia orders them to keep moving. They finally find the fuselage of a plane that had crashed into the sea many years ago and crawl inside to rest. Julia examines the last family photo and tells her children the story of her first meeting with Tom, which occurred in a hospital where he was treated for decompression sickness after a failed dive. The children cry, remembering their father, and say goodbye to him for the last time. At night, Casey wakes up hearing a noise outside and goes out to sit near the plane. From the darkness, the killer approaches, not noticing that the girl is acting as bait. Just as he prepares to catch her, Julia ambushes him and stabs him with a knife. At dawn, the family gets ready to continue their journey, but they discover that the killer's body has been plundered. A sign that something even more dangerous than humans roams the desert. They keep moving forward while Julia consults the map. Suddenly, Ben runs ahead, and his mother shouts at him to stop. But the boy runs to a salty puddle and manages to drink a few sips before she drags him away. Shortly after, Ben gets sick. They find some plastic chairs and build a makeshift shelter from the sun. While resting inside, Julia hears strange sounds outside. She goes out and sees something that forces her to wake the children. The three run, realizing the new danger. In the distance, they see a large ship surrounded by overturned containers and some wandering people. Julia calls them, but then they notice thousands of giant crabs approaching from the horizon. They run towards a container for shelter, but the wanderers, in a panic, close the doors, ignoring their pleas. Julia, Casey, and Ben manage to climb onto the roof of the container, although the crabs manage to wound her in the leg. From above, the family watches in horror as the crabs penetrate through the cracks and devour everyone inside. Despite desperate attempts to defend herself, Julia ties a scarf around her leg and faints. The next morning, she wakes up alone, terrified. She calls the children and soon discovers that the crabs are gone. Casey and Ben had gone down to look for food and weapons. Julia cauterizes her wound while Ben examines the found weaponry. Searching among the containers, they find a small amount of food and a little water in the pocket of one of the deceased. Julia locates a radio and manages to contact NATO again. He explains that he was also attacked by deep-sea arthropods and that, according to his observations, the ocean is about to return, which is why the creatures have emerged. Julia begs him to save her children, but she has lost the map and doesn't know where to go. NATO fires a flare, and Ben sees the direction the glow points to. The family runs in that direction and soon distinguishes a yellow submarine in the distance, but reaching it proves difficult due to the uneven terrain of the ancient seabed. Casey doesn't like the idea of saving themselves alone, but Julia doesn't respond and pushes them to continue. They are forced to cross a canyon contaminated with toxic waste. At one point, they get caught in a rock slide, and Julia is separated from the children. She orders them to continue, and when Casey refuses, Julia begs her to save her brother. Casey and Ben manage to get out of the canyon and reach the submarine, but they discover there's no one inside. Suddenly, NATO, gravely wounded, appears behind the submersible. He tells them he has no chance of survival and orders them to board, but Casey goes back in search of her mother, who is defending herself from the emerging crabs. Her ammunition is almost exhausted. The girl climbs the rock barrier and extends her hand towards Julia, who manages to reach her. Both climb up just as the crabs invade the place and trap NATO between their claws. The family enters the submarine, and at that moment, a gigantic wave appears on the horizon. The ocean is back. The water lifts the submersible and drags it over the rocks. Julia, exhausted, observes everything that has happened in recent days before fainting. When she wakes up, the submarine is stranded. She opens the hatch, and together with her children, emerges to find herself in a ruined city dragged there by the wave. If you want interesting movie recaps, like, share, and subscribe to follow us for more movie recaps.